Good morning. Thank you very much for coming out this morning. Michael, thank you for spending some time with us this morning.
A pleasure. Good morning, everyone.
As the Dean said, on Monday morning, the company announced that you would be retiring as of December 23rd from the role of President, CEO, and Chairman of the Board. My first question is, what have the last 3 days been like for you since the announcement?
Very interesting. I think the first question everybody has is my health okay? Right? That was the first question that's come from almost everybody, inside the company, outside the company. And the answer to that question is my health is just fine. It's probably better than it's been in 13 years because it's less stress worrying about the future and tomorrow. The second question is, what are my plans in the future? And as you can imagine, I all want to know whether I'm going to board up, right, or look for something else to do. And the answer is that I'm only interested in one thing, and that's the transition to the new CEO and the amount of time that I will spend after the 23rd of December in making sure that there's a smooth, seamless transition for all the wonderful employees of this company.
When did you actually make the decision to retire?
My contract, in the public world you always have contracts. My contract was up in just March of 13.
Yep.
So this was the time that the board and I had to contemplate, do I extend 1 year? Do I extend 2 years? And I had no interest in going beyond 2 years. Or do we accelerate the process?
Yep.
And the board and I had a discussion, and we came to the conclusion that, if 1 year is your sort of perfect extension, just for stability of the company, why don't we think about advancing it a year?
Yep.
And I agreed, and that's where we find ourselves.
Very good. The company has spent a lot of time, you've spent a lot of time working on succession planning, so I know there's an orderly process now that's going to be followed. You'll have an interim officer for a time here.
Yes.
And the mechanics are already underway to identify candidates both inside and outside the firm who might succeed you. Is that right?
Yes, it's very, very important, especially in a company as complex as Brink's. I think we have 4 or 5 internal candidates that are absolutely first class, capable, but it's not my decision, it's the board's decision.
Sure.
They have to work with that individual for the next 3 to 5 year period at a minimum. And so it's just good process to look outside as well as inside the company. And that process is underway, and Tom's working on it, and I will assist him in any manner necessary.
Terrific. When you joined the company in 1982, did you imagine it would be a 29-year, 30-year run?
No, I don't think anybody ever imagines that when they join a company. And of course, I started with the Brink's company, the Brink's Inc. company, the CIT company. At that time, it was only a $100 million company and was the smallest of the Pittston group. So the thought that I would be there for that period of time never crossed my mind.
Today, it's approaching $4 billion in revenue and about 70,000 employees around the globe. I want to have you talk about those employees a little bit. I also want to talk a little bit about the history of the firm, the actions that you had to take early in your time as CEO. And I also want to have our audience understand how it is that Brink's ended up here in Richmond. Let's first talk about those employees, Michael. Your employees, many of them, are working in very dangerous places in a very dangerous business. This notion of moving cash and valuables from place to place. Maybe we see the Brink's trucks driving through, the west end of Richmond, perhaps. But you're seeing those Brink's trucks in all parts of the world, and they're being driven by really loyal employees whose lives are indeed in danger a lot of the time. Is that correct?
That's correct. The difference between Brink's and a UPS or a FedEx are 2 things. It's the risk that we take, because if we lose our product, we write a check. Right? We write a check. It's not like the airlines where they lose your luggage, they give you $100, right? If we lose $25 million shipment, we have to write a $25 million check. The second difference is we're not like the police, where the criminals and the terrorists avoid them, right? We're unfortunately more like the U.S. military, where we're targeted by the criminal elements and terrorist elements around the world. So that's the challenge of the leadership of this company, is to understand that, which gets you to the employees. It's a very dangerous job. And our mantra at Brink's is that every employee goes home safely to their family every night. And if they don't, that's a management failure. And I take that very, very personally. Last night I was in our museum, which is located in Chicago, where the company began 152 years ago. And we were having a celebration with another great American company called Navistar, International Harvester, for those of you who have been around long enough. And the celebration was about doing business together for 100 years, our companies. We've been buying their vehicles for 100 years. And their CEO was there. And in our museum, the first thing you see when you walk in is our honor roll. And there's 192 Brink's employees' names, unfortunately, on that honor roll that in this 152-year history have given their life taking care of our customers and our fellow employees. And he was quite moved by that, and as I was, especially since we lost a young man, a 25-year-old employee in Miami 2.5 months ago. And those are devastating things, and I think what drives all Brink's executives is making sure that we keep that number as low as possible in the future, including the dangerous places we operate.
When one of your vehicles is involved in an incident on the road, the firm actually does not classify that as an accident. Is that right?
Right. I banned the word accidents early in my career. We have crashes, right? You know, you stub your toe, that's an accident, right? You crash an armored vehicle, that's a crash. And so anybody that ever uses the word accident in front of me, anywhere in the world, I'm the first guy to stand up and say, what did you just say? Right? Those are crashes. Driving a Brink's truck, it's a heavy armored truck. They weigh 2 to 3 times what a normal vehicle is. And so driving is very, very important. By the way, you know, we're about safety and security as a company. Safety is the first word, right? Safety of our employees, right? Security is the second word. And when you have an auto crash, people tend to get hurt. Our people, and God forbid, sometimes members of the general public who are in normal vehicles. So that's why I call them crashes, not accidents.
And you mentioned around the world those kinds of conversations are going on. My understanding is that it's very common for you to show up unannounced in one of your, let's just say in a foreign location. I'm told that often happens between 5 and 6 in the morning, and that the first notice that they have that you're on site is you presenting your Brink's ID to the security guard at the facility. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what's magical about that 5 or 6 a.m. hour?
Well, if you want to see your employees in our business, right, they're loading the trucks and getting ready to go out on the streets for normal business hours. So we're busy between 5 and 7 o'clock in the morning is the busy time in the branch, and then our employees are, the truck employees are gone all day long, and they come back basically at the close of business. There's usually a 12-hour day around the world. And so if you want to see your frontline people, if you want to see their attitude, if you want to see how management is performing at that location, you have to get up and go see your employees. It's no difference than years ago when we owned Bax Global. You know, our freight hub was in Toledo, Ohio. So think of FedEx in Memphis or UPS in Louisville. If you want to see your pilots, you want to see your employees, well, the only time they're together is when they bring all that freight together, right? And all the planes are there, and they're doing the switch between the planes. And so I used to show up there at 2 a.m. in the morning because the freight sort was 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning. And if you care about your employees, if you care about your company, right, you really want to know what's going on and get through all the layers of management, you've got to get to the front line.
This leads to my next question. If I wanted to really get to know the firm, especially where the firm's headed in the future, and I had a week to do that, and perhaps you would be my guide for that week, where would we go? What would we see? What would you want me to get a sense of, especially in terms of the future of Brink's?
Well, first of all, everybody thinks of Brink's, they think of these trucks, these advertising wallboards, and that's probably 40% of our business. We're the largest movers of diamonds, jewelry, gold, platinum. We're the largest stores and maintenance of those types of items. So I would probably take you to London, which is still the gold center of the world. That's where the gold price is set every day. It's the historic gold center of the world. And we run a series of vaults that store a substantial amount of money, always up to our insurance limits. We have the highest insurance limits in the world that you can imagine. And introduce you to Lloyd's of London, which is absolutely vital for a relationship for our firm. I think from there, we'd start going to the developing world. I think the next place would be to go to Turkey, you know, a large nation, large population, young population, growing, open society. We were making a big bet by expanding on a national basis. Then to Russia, very, very challenging environment. We've gone through the transitions, much different than the Chinese have from a communist society. A lot of corruption issues still to worry about. We've been doing business there for 25 years through subcontractors. And then we bought our subcontractor because we've known them for 25 years. We felt comfortable. We insisted on a majority, so it's our ethics and our business standards. And then I would continue east into Hong Kong and China, developing markets. And then the last trip, of course, would be down to Latin America, which is one of our fastest growing areas, most dynamic areas. And then I would pull back and say, you know, we've been in these traditional businesses. You know, what's going to happen to cash in 10 years? What's going to happen to cash in 15 years? And so we've made huge bets on, I call adjacent businesses.
Yep.
Adjacent businesses being running the back offices, running the ATM networks for the banks, processing the bank's checks, credit cards. I call it our back office business. So if mobile payments is the major way of doing these things, who's going to run those back office opportunities? You know, we've had a financial crisis in the United States and Western Europe. We're still in it. And it's my judgment those banks are going to be nationalized or broken up all over the United States and all over Western Europe. And smaller unit banks are coming back. The other forces in our country, the American people, are voting with their feet, and they're leaving some of these, I call tier 1 banks, and going to smaller banks. We can invest in the back office software and infrastructure and compliance. More regulations being put on top of that industry. We can keep up with that to help the smaller institutions, the tier 2 banks, the tier 3 banks, the savings and loans, right, as future of our business. Yep. And so I am, quote, hedging our bets in our strategic plan to 2015 to accomplish that. More importantly, I'm making the acquisitions. I'm buying the companies around the world to enable us to have a new capability to use with our geographic footprint, our global management expertise, and of course our brand name.
You're not going to be the only one competing in that space, but if you're going to win some of that business, it's probably going to be the case that it's because folks trust you, that you've established a relationship, and the notion of handling cash translates into handling cash, you know, not out in the public through trucks, but in the back office. Is that right? Is that right? The bet that you're hoping you'll win business based on that?
You know, we have new competitors in that space.
Yep.
So, for instance, we just won a contract in Colombia, and I wasn't bidding against our traditional cash competitors. I was just participating against some of the consulting firms, Tata, as an example, okay? But Tata is not that well known in the banking industry. The banking industry has known us for in Colombia, it was 26 years. And so we won the contract. But we were up against, you know, people like Fiserv. Those weren't the people we typically competed with. So we have to learn how to compete in that space. And there's a learning curve at a company. You just don't decide to take your business and just jump into a new basket somewhere. You've got to build internal expertise. So we're not taking our armored car people and trying to teach them to be business back office solutions people. We're buying companies who have that skill, adding that skill set to ours. Now, I'll tell you what's exciting about that business. If it's a back office business, the typical contract length is 5, 7, or 10-year contract. In our traditional business, it's typically a 1 or 3-year contract. So it becomes stickier business for us, right? And so if we combine those businesses together, right, the customer base becomes stickier for the long term for our industry. That's very exciting.
So I want to circle back to the start of your time as a CEO, because at the moment we're talking about adding businesses. Early on in your career, there was a lot of reorganization and eventually some divestiture of businesses. So what was the company when you became CEO? What were the units of the company at the time? It was a very diverse company.
When I became CEO of the Pittston Company,
yep.
I believe it was in February of '98. I was living up in Darien, Connecticut. I was running the Brink's company, and Brink's Home Security,
yep.
Those two divisions. And when I was asked to become head of the Pittston Company, we were 3 tracking stocks trading on the New York Stock Exchange. One company, one board of directors, one legal entity, but 3 separate tracking stocks. One represented the Brink's companies, the security companies. One represented Bax Global, the largest heavy freight movement company, a global company also, much bigger than Brink's. And in our natural resource businesses, which were coal, gold, timber, land. We were the largest landholder in the state of Virginia, as an example. And through the years, when we first started splitting these stocks, which was before my time, we created a tremendous amount of shareholder value, right? Because people didn't want to invest in a conglomerate that had all these businesses that were different. But we couldn't spin off the companies because we had liabilities. We went from 25,000 coal employees to about 2,500 coal employees. But over the 6 years of the stocks being split, those shareholder bases totally changed. And so the challenge that the company faced was that basically the coal company was basically bankrupt. And so in a normal case, you just go out and sell a division and take that cash and cure the liabilities on the other side. Well, there wasn't enough assets in the other tracking stocks to do that. And it was my judgment, and judgment of some very good advisors I hired, that if I sold assets from this tracking stock and this group of shareholders and used it to pay for the liability of this tracking stock in a different group of shareholders, I would spend the rest of my career in litigation.
Yep.
So I made the call that I was going to do something that was never ever done before in the history of Wall Street, which is collapse the tracking stocks. So if you can imagine going to the board of directors who were there because they wanted to be on a company that was a coal company and tell them I'm going to collapse the stock and sell the natural resource business. And I guarantee you the market value of the company is going to tank. That wasn't a very pleasant meeting. But I explained to them over 2 or 3 meetings that we had no choice, we had to do this. The board made the tough call, and then the board backed me through a very, very difficult time. It took 3 years for me to sell the natural resource business. And I didn't sell it in a lump. It was impossible to sell. We had a unionized side, we had a non-unionized side, we had a gas business. So I sold a gas business, a timber business, a gold business, a non-union side. But I'm happy to tell you that over that period of time, we received about $600 million of cash for our shareholders. And we were facing these huge legacy liabilities from retired coal miners. So that was the first step. Mm-hmm. The second step was with Bax Global. It was a $2+ billion company. It wasn't making any money. It was losing $50 million in North America. It was making $50 million in Asia, so basically a break even. And we had, I really had to jump into that company because they didn't think of themselves as a leader. And I was running Brink's my career, and Brink's is a leader. So there was a mentality and a culture problem at Bax. So I changed leadership twice and said, we're going to be the industry leader in heavyweight freight, and we're going to find a way to fix the United States business. And the first thing I did is I went in and I fired our 2 largest customers, Ford and GM, because 60–70% of the freight we were hauling every night was for Ford and GM, and we were losing $50 million. So that didn't make any sense. Obviously, management thought that was the dumbest thing in the world because now those planes are going to be flying empty. So some revenue was better than no revenue. Well, I think if you look at the airline industry, even the passenger industry, you can see that hasn't been a good deal for the last 25 years. So I said, what we're going to do is we're going to fill that plane up with small freight forwarders, people who don't have the capital strength of the Pittston company at the time, right? We're going to go after the small freight forwarders, right, who are willing to pay a premium price for that space on that planes, and we're going to fix this company in North America. And that's when the hedge funds entered, who demanded that I close the company, that it was impeding the value of the Brink's company, that I closed the company, that I put the company up for sale, one or the other. And I knew that our strategy was working, and the board was under a lot of pressure. We went through some proxy fights with the hedge funds. We had some settlements. It was a very difficult time for the board. It was a very difficult time for myself. But I stalled it for 3 years and then sold the company to Deutsche Bahn, the German railroad, German government, for $1.1 billion. And then all my arch enemies at the time, hedge funds, they all of a sudden thought I was a hero. So I took that money, and by the way, all that money was tax-free because the losses of the coal business, right, were still running through the corporate books. And so I was able to take $600 million of that and buy back 20% of the outstanding shares of the company. And I took another $400 million of that, and I established a voluntary employees benefit trust to pay for the retiree benefits and the health benefits of our coal miners, which is the historic history of the company, which lifted a huge cloud off the valuation of the company. And I thought I was done. We had a pure play security company, Brink's and Brink's Home Security, but the hedge funds still weren't satisfied. Some new ones came in, and they say, you're running a B2B business, which is the Brink's business, and you're running a B2C business, which is Brink's Home Security, and we think they should be separate businesses, and we think you're undervalued, and battle continued for another couple years, and eventually the board made a decision to spin off Home Security to the shareholders, which was done in October of 2008. No, that's when the spin took. The decision was made earlier in the year. Couldn't be worse timing, right? That's when the market crashed. But the reality is that company, unfortunately, could not use the Brink's name, and the Brink's name is so valuable, it was hurting that company during their brief period of Broadview security. Yep. And they took an offer from ADT, Tyco Corporation, to buy that company for $2 billion. So our shareholders ended up realizing a lot of value when that transaction took place. And then Hedge funds were gone, settled down. It's been more of a normal process since then.
What did you learn from that time with the hedge funds? I mean, when they really wouldn't go away, and I think at one time, one of the hedge funds had acquired maybe a 1/12 of the company, I mean, outstanding shares for the company. So this was a new challenge for you as a CEO. You must have called, I guess, on a new set of advisors to get through that. Maybe you had top management team that could help you through it. But what did you learn about yourself in that struggle?
Well, when most hedge funds come into a company, most people, most CEOs depart. The hedge fund's goal is to force a change. They're not happy with something that's going on. So their goal is to drive a wedge between operating management of the company, and the board of directors. Scare the board of directors. That's their job. And I'm a stubborn Irishman, and so to me those just become challenges. And the challenges I faced in the boardroom is you have to have a lot of sympathy for your directors. You know, your directors show up 6 times a year for 2 days. They give 100% of their time and attention to the company during a very intense period. And all of a sudden they're coming to these meetings and they're not pleasant anymore. We're not talking about the business challenges, the strategies, where we're exceeding and where we're falling short, what management's doing about it, which is the normal dialogue that goes on the board. We're talking about their fear of their personal liability and the statements that are being made usually publicly by a hedge fund, right, which aren't necessarily anything to do with fact. And so it's a very difficult thing to be a chairman of the board, right, and be the CEO at the same time through a crisis like that. Because my job was to protect the company and to protect the board. And at times that was in conflict. And so it was a very, very stressful time. It was probably the most stressful time in my business career to steer through that. But what I learned about myself was that if you believe in what you're doing and you're doing the right thing first for the company and for the other stakeholders that are involved, right? If you're not willing to stand up, then get out of the way. And I decided I was going to stand up. And I'm glad I did. And I think the board of directors has been very, very generous with me and how I conducted ourselves through that. And the hedge funds said, a couple of them came to me, one that was happy with the back sale, right? Because they own a winery, so I got like 10 cases of wine, which I happen to love, by the way.
The firm was valued at about $600 million at the time. When you fetched $1.1 billion, is that right? So I mean, that's where the happiness comes from.
There's been about $5 billion of shareholder value created under my tenure. Yeah. But you know, that's not what counts. You know, what I'm proud is that we funded our retiree obligations. We funded our health care. You know, we had 25,000 retired miners. Okay, this company had to do. We didn't dump them on the federal government, on the taxpayers, right? We came up with a strategy, deconglomerated the company, but more importantly, we took care of our liabilities, we took care of our employees. That's what I'm most proud of.
And you've said publicly a couple of times that you don't run the firm for the shareholders. I'm surprised by that a Fortune 1000 CEO of a publicly traded firm can come out and say, I don't run the firm for the shareholders. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yes, you know, at the end of the day, it's about the people who work for you. They deliver the service, the process to your customers. They keep your customers happy. It's their morale that counts, right? The shareholder value will follow. It'll follow. It always does, and it always has in my business career. Now, people don't like to hear anybody say that, all right? And when I said it, we were a Fortune 500 company because we still had, you know, backs and coal. And it was quite shocking. And it got a lot of press in the Wall Street Journal at the time. But I stand by it today, right? The shareholders will benefit, right? But if you don't have the great employees who are aligned behind a strategy, who are willing to follow the leadership of the company, right? And go the extra mile and do incredible things, right, within the culture of the company, you're not going to be successful. And for those of you who have worked for companies or worked for businesses where you weren't sure about the quality of management or the strategy or the atmosphere, you know, I challenge you someday to walk into a Brink's facility, a Brink's branch. I know enough people here at the university have dealt with some of my top management have come over here. There's a spirit that is absolutely unique about this company because they know that we care about them more than we care about the bottom line. And I could talk to you I could show you, 10,000 emails I received the last 3 days. And the 3 things that they said, 3 themes were, we're shocked that you're going, number 1. Number 2, you're the most humble person. And you're the only CEO that ever put the employees ahead of the bottom line of a multinational company. Those 3 themes come through in all those emails.
10, 12, or 15 years ago, Brink's was global, but in a different way. I mean, you had minority stakes in a lot of foreign operations. and you saw that as a particular weakness. Strategically, you didn't feel like the company could be what it could be as long as there were minority stakes, and you went about very aggressively changing that, didn't you?
The strategy before I came was we had to move international valuables, and we wanted to control the chain, to be in the Brink's control from point A to point B, so we used subcontractors. The predecessors at Brink's Inc. believed that we wanted to be minority stakes in those countries. So we made a lot of our partners very, very wealthy, very, very rich. Well, when I became head of Brink, CEO of Brink's, was about 1991. That's the Brink subsidiary at the time of Pittston. I went and visited everybody and told them that the world's globalizing, the world's changing. You know, ATM machines are becoming global. Back office processing has become more important, so we need to change how we operate our business. And many of these people were great partners for 20, 30, and 40 years, and they basically said things to me like, no, we don't want to do that. We're happy with where things are. So we're really not interested in, I really push hard as a minority shareholder. And they basically said, Mr. Dan, you're the 5th president. We'll wait for the 6th president. So I went home and came up with a strategy that said, I'm going to control my own destiny. So the first thing I did was I started an insurance company. I told you how important insurance is in our business. So I started an insurance company, right? And I made it so attractive that I forced all those companies to buy insurance from me. So one, I got a grab on them. Number two, I went to court and I proved in countries all over the world that the Brink's company in the United States owned the Brink's brand name, even if they had trademarked it in their company. So now I own the brand name. And then number three, I'm not going to share best practices, or I'm not going to help these companies go through this transition unless they buy into the program. So my next visit was much simpler. It was, you buy me or I buy you, right? And we'll do it in a professional manner, and we'll do it at the right time where it makes sense. And some of those were today, some of those were within a couple of years. And so over a period of 5 years, I was able to get majority stakes in every company today, except 2, which I don't have, but I've got excellent partners. I don't need them. When the time comes, I'm sure we'll buy up. And then there's 2 companies that I exited, right? One was Italy, which was a large company, and that was an easy decision because we owned 26% of the company, and my other shareholders were my competitors in Italy. My competitors owned the other part of the company. And we made no money. Made no money. They made a lot of board fees, but we made no money. So I fought them, went to court, 3-year battle, and eventually I forced them to buy me. I did not get anywhere near the value of that company, but there was no value in it to me at all, so I was happy to get out. That company lasted about 4 years without the Brink's name and fell apart. And I exited Pakistan. And I exited Pakistan on the employee issue. We had 4 employees murdered in a very, very bad robbery in Karachi. And I called up our partner, who was a majority partner, and extended my condolences and wanted to discuss the plans for the families, the employees. We usually pay the college education, the kids, and those types of things. And he said, no, we don't do that in Pakistan. People are replaceable. Well, you know, that's sort of against my moral creed, my moral grounding. So I had a call option in that contract. And I hung the phone up and I called him back the next day and I said the same thing. You're buying me or I'm buying you. You can't be part of the Brink's family. You don't get it. It's about our employees.
And around the same time, you set out on a very aggressive course to establish a zero-tolerance policy. You operate in an industry where corruption has been prevalent in some times and in some places. You also operate in regions and countries where corruption is part of everyday life. Mm-hmm. So what was zero tolerance? What is it today? And how confident are you that you've made strides in reducing the amount of corruption inside the firm and in its business partners?
Well, when I walked into a certain South American country when I first became president in 91 at Brink's, and I wanted to know whose office this was. And they said it's a office for the wife of the purchasing manager of one of our major customers. I go, well, where is she? Well, she doesn't come to work. Who's in this office? I went around and I called the senior management group together that day, right? And I said, they're all terminated off the payroll tonight. We're done. We're finished. Off the payroll. Oh, you can't do that. The business, we'll go out of business. we'll go out of business. You can't do that, Mr. Dan. You don't understand. That's how business is done in this country. I said, no, you don't understand, right? We're going to operate to the ethical rules of the Pittston Company, right? Now, if you have ethical rules that are better than theirs, we'll add those, right? But there's zero tolerance. This is where we're going. And of course, all those people were removed from the payroll. By the way, I said, if you don't remove them, you're off the payroll tonight. Which was a good incentive for them to move, right? So they moved, and of course, nothing happened, right? Because if something happened, if they came in and think about it, if they came in and canceled the business, right? I'd be in the president's office of the bank saying, you know why we lost the business? There was this corruption going on, and I refused to allow this corruption to go on. So I knew we weren't going to lose the business. And there was about 6 or 7 countries we had that problem. So once you do that, you demonstrate it, the rest of the company sees it, that you have a zero tolerance policy. It just takes hold and it spreads. So how do we do it? Well, it's easy today. We have like 5 different ways for employees to come around the system, right? To get to me, to get to management, to get to the legal department, to get to compliance officers inside the company, outside the company, right? Because people have to have multiple avenues to go around the system because they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel comfortable, right? And of course, we have audits. Now, do issues develop? Issues develop all the time. We do annual surveys, right? Is there conflicts of interest? There's 300-400 issues that'll show up that the legal department will trace every single issue down to find, is it a conflict, is it not a conflict? Is somebody dealing with a supplier who's a relative or those types of things? Is an employee working for another company? Every single one of those is chased down, right? And a report goes to the board of directors on how many surveys went out, which we've increased every year. Oh, by the way, first year we did it, we're all in English. Now, that's great for the top management of the company. That doesn't do anything for the middle management of the company. They don't speak English.
Right.
So we learned through the years to translate it into many, many languages. And we chase every single one down, report to the board of directors, and if there was anything that had any substance at all, what action we took to the board of directors. Right? And we've been doing this for so long, that's the culture of the company. We haul people's money. People give us their money. There's a different level of trust. Those of you in the financial industry know you're held to a higher standard in the financial industry than you are in most businesses. Well, I want you to give me your money. So there can be no doubt about the level of trust and the ethics of the company. And actually, it's an easy philosophy because if we violate that, we're going to hurt that brand name. So it has to be zero tolerance.
And if there's a mid-level manager today in Turkey or in Colombia who smells something, thinks something's fishy, what's your best guess about how long it takes for them to feel that way and tell the first person? What's the duration of time between that first report and it reaching you or the board of directors? How confident are you that that's flowing pretty quickly?
A decision is made within days whether we should put the head of the audit committee on notice that there's a possible problem.
Yep.
Right? That's a call. Now, you make that call wrong and it turns out to be a problem, they'll question, why did it take so long to tell us?
Yep.
But obviously 90% of them, 99% of them aren't a problem. Yep. Some of them are just misunderstandings about things. Sure. Some are mad that I wasn't promoted and somebody else was promoted. There's all different reasons, and some are true. But if you don't take everyone seriously, okay, you're not going to establish a culture. So we had an issue recently in a country in South America, and I sent somebody down there to do the investigation, and it turned out to be a non-issue. But everybody in that country knew that an issue was raised, right? And within 3 days, an internal auditor and a finance person and one of our lawyers showed up. Now, guess what? Everybody in the company heard about that within 3 days, right? We take this serious. And it turned out to be a non-issue, but we invested the time and the funds because I want everybody to know that's how serious we take it.
There's an incident in Washington, D.C. or Northern Virginia, I think in 2010, there was a robbery of a Brink's truck, and it turned out that one of the drivers of the truck, an employee of Brink's, happened to be in on the job.
Yes.
How did those, one instance out of however many, 70,000 employees, but how do they find their way through the crack? And can you say a little bit about the aftermath of that? Because she was identified pretty quickly as having been involved. I mean, within days, it seemed. You
can imagine that these trucks have more money in them than these people will earn in their lifetime. And it was in Washington, D.C. It was happened to be a female driver who worked for us for a few years, and she was in a romantic relationship with a criminal who put incredible pressure on her to commit this crime. And that's really, really difficult, really, really difficult. We have about 90 instances a year somewhere in the world. That's what we average. Good years, bad years, different numbers. On average, 90 instances. I would say that 85% of them have some type of internal effect, whether it's knowledge, whether it's information, whether it's kidnapping of families, right, that happen, and you better drive a truck or open the door and throw out money, we're going to kill your family. We call them tiger kidnappings. And we have procedures and ways to deal with that. So our employees are under a lot of stress and strain. And so this poor woman succumbed to the pressure, which became not only pressure, became physical threats to her well-being. And she had to make a decision to tell us or to comply. And she made the decision to comply. I would tell you that 80% of the time that the decision is made to tell us, right? And we get the law enforcement, police involved, and we resolve it. 20% of the time it doesn't happen. And I've been here a long time. I can tell you a lot of sad stories where our employees were put in difficult positions, where their families were kidnapped and threatened if they didn't do something. But once again, we learn from these things. We have procedures. We train our people how to deal with that. And that's part of what we do as a business.
When these criminals are found guilty in a court of law of having threatened or harmed one of your employees, they're often sentenced to 6, 8, 10, 12 years in prison. Do you care to say anything about the sentences that they receive? You sit here as CEO. You've said you want every one of them to get home safely at night. Mm-hmm. Do you pay attention to the sentences that eventually come down?
Well, not only pay attention, we write letters to the judges. We have our security department follow them. After they're convicted, we have our security department to go to jail and befriend them and try to understand whether they're an employee, they were a criminal, or they were a terrorist, to learn from it, right? And to share the knowledge. There's knowledge to be gained, knowledge to be learned. And the other thing is we have an incident happened and it's not solved, right? Employee shot, employee killed, or robbery, it's not solved. There's a famous saying, there's no honor among thieves. So, a year later, I have this internal alarm clock in my head that said, it's been a year since this happened. Let's put another ad in the paper, $50,000, $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of these individuals. 2 years later, 3 years later, eventually, right? Somebody's going to come forward, and we're going to get the person. We're going to get the person, because there's no honor among thieves. There's a falling out. They did 5 other instances, 5 other robberies. One of them felt they got the short end of the stick, and they come for the money. Because anybody hurts a Brink's employee, I don't sleep till we get them. I don't sleep till we get them. Seriously, it's on my mind constantly.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little more about the global nature of your business. You're in more than 60 countries now. It's my understanding, you told me a few years ago, that you gather those country managers together, I think, every other year. Mm-hmm. What goes on at those meetings? What are they learning from each other? So it would be some 60-odd folks, but also some headquarter personnel gathering for a few days. I think a few years ago it was in Costa Rica, was it not? And so you've rotated this around the world. What's that conversation like when these 60-odd folks are coming together? What do they learn from each other today?
Well, it's a biannual meeting, and of course we give a company update on where we are in our strategic plan for 5 years. And we plan a workshop, 3 or 4 workshops, on what are the key things that we're trying to move the company in the direction and the best way to get there. And we divide them into smaller groups and go forward. And they get the camaraderie and get to know each other and share best practices. It's also our award ceremony. And we have an award established after a gentleman named Jack Walsh, who went out and made a lot of these international companies when we were a minority philosophy. It's called the Jack Walsh Award. And we give one to the best country in Latin America, one to the best country in Europe, one to the best country in Asia, and then we give one to the best country in the world. And these people are competing to win that award. And if you want to see emotions, you come to one of those meetings, and there's a lot of tears going on from a lot of people, right? When you're named the best Brink's company in Latin America, or heavens forbid, you win the best country of Brink's in the world. And of course, you imagine what that means when that general manager goes back to his company and the celebrations that go on. That this 152-year-old company with this great tradition, we were rated the best in Europe. It's a very, very powerful thing. And that award night is also my opportunity to give my address, my speech to the company on what I see, the challenges we face, and the responsibilities. And the speech is usually the same, right? We got a great company, we got a great brand, we got a great customer base, right? The people in this room, right, All we can do as managers is screw it up, right? And when you come to work here, what I expect from you, right, is to take the cards you were dealt with, take a look at them, honestly assess the situation in your company, right? Improve it, make it a little bit better, and hand it off to your successor in better shape till you got it. Then you've done your job in this company, right? And by the way, the culture is so strong in this company that if you're a bad manager, you'll be drummed out by the employees of the company. That's how strong the culture is in Brinks. The frontline employees will drive you out of the company if they don't think you're putting them first and believing. They will drive you out. We'll get so many contacts at headquarters. You know, a bad employee is a bad employee. You've all dealt with bad employees, bad neighbors, bad students, right? Bad family members, right? You've all dealt with that. There is nothing worse than a bad manager because they can make 20 people's lives, 200 people's lives, 10,000, 70,000 people's lives miserable. So I hold a high standard to management, right? I want to get a bad manager out sooner rather than later because they make too many people's lives miserable.
On the flip side of that, a good manager can build a very loyal workforce. I'd like for you to take a minute to talk about what happened down in Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina with respect to the facility that you had down there.
Well, needless to say, Katrina was a natural disaster for our country, and the area was devastated, as you all know. And the first reports coming out after Katrina, we all read the paper, you know what they were. But we still had a few helicopters in our natural resource business because we were monitoring some of our coal properties. So I immediately dispatched the helicopters down to New Orleans. And the first thing we wanted to ascertain was our branch underwater. The second thing we wanted to ascertain was our branch closed up, locked up, and protected. And the report that came back is that our branch was surrounded with armed individuals. Armed individuals. It wasn't underwater, but it was surrounded with armed individuals. And I said, try to locate the branch manager, which they successfully did. They literally flew to his house, picked him up, put him in the helicopter, flew low over the facility, and he said, those are our employees. They left their families and they left their home to come to protect their place of work and their job because they knew they had to pay the rent and feed their family next week. They were our employees protecting, and I don't know how you teach that. I don't know how you teach that, right? Except to have a culture that this company has and make sure you maintain and reinforce it all the time. They left their families. So, you know, and to me, that's why I come to work. That's the culture of this company.
It's a heck of a story. Would you put that, you're going to eventually look back at 29 or 30 years with the firm. Is that a highlight? Is that the highlight, do you think, Michael?
No, I think, you know, I could give you highlights. I mean, you know, yesterday I was in Chicago at 6 o'clock in the morning, and a woman from Bosnia came, you know, with us for 7 years and never had the opportunity to meet me. And she walked up to me and she said, Mr. Dan, I asked to meet you today because I haven't met you. And every Friday when I get my paycheck, your name's on it, and I pray for you every Friday. And I want to thank you for taking care of me and my family. And I said, is there anything I can do for you? She says, Mr. Dan, would you please open up in Bosnia so I can go home? And I want to work for you. I mean, those are the types of things that I've been dealing with the last few days. Yeah. That means more to me than anything you could ever imagine.
It's quite a statement for a company of 70,000 employees that you've been able to have that human touch. I know you've been involved with the Business Roundtable. In fact, you've chaired their project around disaster response. What are you learning from fellow CEOs through the Business Roundtable? How have they helped you, and how do you think you've helped them as CEOs?
The BRT is basically off-the-record gathering. It's large businesses' voice to Congress, similar to the AFL-CIO. And I've been on it for 13 years. My last meeting was this week, by the way. I was talking with some of our fellow attendees today that I've taken for granted that 4 times a year I could talk to the president or the vice president or Ben Bernanke or Alan Greenspan and the leadership of the Republican Party or Democratic Party in the Senate or the House. I started taking advantage. That's just normal for me to do, right? All of a sudden, all that's going to end. But, you know, the country's in trouble. Our country's in trouble. And in this room are 140, 150 CEOs now about, you know, how do we get this country moving? What can we do? How can we influence things? We get demonized in the world. CEOs get demonized. You have all this money overseas, you're not bringing it home because it's going to get taxed. That's the message you see in the newspapers. Well, that's true. That's true. Well, I made that money overseas, and I'm investing overseas, and 80% of my business is overseas. Why would I take that money and bring it home into the United States where there's less investment opportunities and pay tax on it yet again? I would be violating my fiduciary responsibility of running this company, right? I mean, Congress doesn't understand those types of things. And so we go into Congress, we try to educate them about those things. And we try to share with them the challenges the country faces. And it's been tough for the Business Roundtable because we've been demonized, since the Enron, since the WorldCom, and then the latest financial disaster in 2008, we're still being demonized by the politicians and even by the President of the United States. That's not a healthy situation to be in. Congress is dysfunctional, 12% approval rating. John McCain made the comment at 12%, that sort of covers your family, your employees, and your friends, right? Another senator told me that he's looking for one of those 12%. He just wants to find somebody that approves of what they're doing. Well, there's no trust in Congress. It's really a simple situation. There's no trust in Congress between the right and the left, right? There's just no trust. You can't get anything done in life without trust. You can't have a life without trust. You can't have a relationship without trust, right? And what's wrong with Washington is they don't trust each other. So now we have the gang, right? The super committee. I went to civics class. I actually paid attention to civics class. I don't remember that. But that's what we have today. And there's two things. Harry Reid was one of our people we had breakfast with. He thinks he's done his job because he's allowed a 50 vote majority to vote up or down on whatever plan, if a plan comes out. So he sort of said he's done his job. The Democrats have done his job. The ball's in the Republican court. And of course the Republicans are saying that's all those Democrats. And it's a revenue issue and it's a spending issue. Bowles-Simpson is a great report. And if you didn't read the Bowles-Simpson report, I'm going to chastise you for not being a good American, because that's a great report. It's 67 pages long. It was put together by right, left, Democrats, Republicans, labor leaders, social leaders, NGOs. It was put together. It was passed by 60-some-odd%. President Obama said if there was 75%, he would adopt it. Well, guess what? 61%. The answers to all the problems, taxes, entitlement programs, a path to the future. Just adopt that program, you solve the problems of this country. It'll never happen until they start trusting each other. And if they don't trust each other and get something done, and these automatic cuts stick in, or they do a smoke and mirror, and by the way, they have a week to do this, a week to do this, and it's got to be passed by the end of the year, well, then your job as a citizen of this country is to vote. If they don't get their job done, I don't care whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, you're an independent, vote them out. Vote them out, because they're worried about being voted out. And it's a presidential election year. And so be a citizen.
And so after the first of the year, you'll wake on a Monday morning and not have responsibilities of being a CEO. How is it that you plan to spend the additional time that you'll have after you step down?
Well, my first priority is to assist the company through the transition period.
Yep.
I have no idea how much time that's going to take. I imagine it'll be quite extensive for the first 6 months of 2012, yep. and it'll peter down after that. And it's really about sitting down with my wife and deciding where we're going. And it just so happens I have 3 sons, and 2 sons and a daughter that I'm very proud of. And one of my sons wants to start a business. And I'm not going to start his business. I'm not going to run his business. But I'm going to be his business school professor about how you put together a business plan, how you think about it, what you have to do, what do you do about location, right? And my wife's going to own the business, and he's going to do the sweat equity. And every year it's profitable. I'm going to transfer him 10% of the business, right? And to me, that's going to be a fun little side hobby.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for coming out this morning. Really appreciate all of your insights. Best of luck to you in retirement, and thanks for all the work that you've done with the Robbins School over the last several years, Michael.
I look forward to continuing to be involved with the school. Thank you, everyone, for coming this morning. I appreciate it.
I do too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.